Hello, everyone. Hi. It's always good to start Beers and Banter with your own banter, so thank you. There'll be time after to keep bantering. We're already started. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
That sounded great. Welcome to Beers and Banter. Tonight, our topic is healthcare and hospital history. My name is Morgan. For those who I don't know, I'm the executive director of History Jackson Hole in the Jackson Hole History Museum here. And it's really great to see such a lovely mix of museum people and hospital people out tonight, all coming together around our history. Tonight, I'm joined by Anne Olson, who's the CEO of St. John's Health Foundation, and our panelists, Judy Basye, Betty Anne Ely, Larry Van Genderen, Jim Little Sr., Jayne Ottman, Rich Sugden, and JoAnne Scott. So we have a full panel tonight, and Anna and I will be asking a few questions, and we'll kind of go through and have some banter, and then we'll open it to you all for your own questions of them. We'll try to keep the program about an hour, which I think might be a little challenging, so we might go a little over, wanted to warn you, but you're welcome to head out when you need to. A few other housekeeping details. The bar is still open during the program, so if you need to get up and get yourself another beverage, please do. We also have recycling. Just make sure you throw those cans out in our recycling when you leave. And I want to pause and thank our event sponsors, Roadhouse Brewing, Jackson Hole Winery, and Jaouen. And also a big thank you to our members and donors. They make these free programs possible. If you are not a member at the museum, please join tonight. And I also wanted to point out, hopefully the shootout is quick tonight. That is not what I wanted to point out. But in the back of the deck here, we have a table, and we had some lovely attendees bring some things for everyone to look at. We have some photos from Beverly Landis, and then we also have some really neat artifacts from Claudia Gillette, from her mother, Jeanette. So make sure to check those out as you're heading out. And again, I just want to say thank you to Anna and St. John's Health and the foundation for coming up with this idea and partnering with us. So, yeah.
Thank you. And it is a pleasure to partner. The joy of joining the hospital a few years ago was all mine. And one of the fun thing was I wanted to set the stage tonight because obviously the hospital has been here a lot longer than I think everybody in this room. So I'm going to start with just a little excerpt from this. You all got given a sort of small handout. There is a full version if you are able. You can just go online. Some of the experts from the early years were hilarious, but let me start with this. There's no doubt that Jackson Hole was in need of a hospital in the early 1900s. Even though the population of the High Mountain Valley numbered just in the low hundreds, Jackson population was 264 in 1910. It was remote year-round and extremely isolated. The nearest hospital was over the Tetons in Idaho Falls, a difficult 120-mile trip, even in summer. That's still true, isn't it? For many of the residents, it was a 2-day journey just to get to Jackson. Medical care was largely by self-treatment, unless you were lucky enough to be within reach of the valley's lone doctor. There were endemic diseases, occasional flu outbreaks, but most of all, it was just the hard life in Jackson that took its toll. Working with livestock, felling trees, buildings, firewood, chopping ice, shooting game, an axe or a gun or a horse was never far from reach. A list of injuries from the hospital first few years gives us a clear picture of what was going on. Gunshot wounds in the abdomen, axe amputation of large toe, ruptured spleen, crushed fingers, gunshots to large toe, axe wound to knee, gunshot wound to chest. It was pretty straight and clear what was going on then. We didn't have a behavioral health section like we do now. So nowadays, and I'm just going to sort of fast forward because what was interesting was the first resident physician set up practice. Dr. Luther Palmer came here between 1902 and 1909. He had a small structure, became the Crabtree Motel on the town square. But of course, what we're generally was the early history of the hospital, was on the St. John's Episcopal Church site. And obviously tonight we're going to hear about a slightly different era later on, but I could not pass up the opportunity of reading what I thought was hilarious, fundraising in 1928. So we all think that we have lots of foundations now, but the nurses in 1928 were raising money for the hospital between 26 and 27, and they were able to open the new wing in the spring of 1928. So good old nurses, always doing the hard work. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Morgan to get the panel. Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, now for the panelists. We always start our Beers and Banter with the same or a similar question where we have our panelists introduce themselves. And please do that by answering when and why did you first come to Jackson Hole, and what did you practice, and describe where you practiced. So there are 4 questions in there, but you can try to cover that. We'll start with.
Remember all 4 of them.
I figure your practice will become a part of your intro of how you have Jackson.
Jim is first. Jim's first. Okay. Jim is first.
Jim is okay.
He's been here the longest.
We'll let you guys self-select, yes.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jim Little Senior. My son, Jim Little Junior, is carrying on now and running one of the clinics for the hospital. I first came to Jackson in 1967, and I came up here for the ski area had just opened. They were having an international ski race, and my father, who was a general practitioner in Jaouen for years, was also an Olympic official, and he was coming to be some kind of official at the ski race, and so I came up for the family from Denver. I drove all day Friday, skied all day Saturday, skied Sunday, and then went home on Sunday night. And I thought this was the greatest mountain I'd ever skied on. And when I finished my pediatric training in '72, the battery might be dead.
Sorry, I was trying to turn it up.
That's still there. Yeah, there you go. So I came to Jackson for the summer and was going to spend the summer being on vacation, and was going to join the Peace Corps and go back to work with a project in Nicaragua. Well, that didn't work out. And here I am 50 years later. And so I retired 2 years ago. I have never regretted the move that I made. And I've always been happy to be here. I've been proud of the hospital and the associates that I have here. And it's been a great life for me. So I'm happy to answer questions and talk to anybody else.
Yeah. I'm Judy Basye. It's like seeing just all your old friends here, so that's really fun. But I moved here in 1967, right out of nursing school, with 2 of my roommates who talked me into coming. I did not want to come. I grew up in Minnesota, and I said, fine, I'll come for 1 year. And they moved away, and I'm still here. I like Jim. I loved it here. I love working at the hospital, and it's just been so much fun. But I worked when I first came. It was just the hospital. So we were just a nurse in the whole. We covered the ER, OB, everything, and then later on I worked ICU and flew air ambulance and worked med surg again, and then my last place I worked was oncology. It's been a lot of fun.
My name is Anne Ely, and I moved here, with my first husband and our two children in 1973. And I still remember, when you first move somewhere, you don't have any food because, for obvious reasons, we moved into this little apartment. We had one chair and a bed and a private bed for two of the girls. At any rate, I still remember Judy Basye and Sally Schenkel, the first day I presented myself at the hospital, at the nursery window that the nursery had, standing there thinking, "Boy, you don't look so happy to see me." I was a little intimidated. I had spent the last 8 years working in the University of Utah emergency room, and we were the knife and gun club and all the prostitutes, and the pimps brought their staff in, that's what they called the girls. And so it was a real busy ER and a lot of devastating things. And so I thought, oh my gosh, this little town and this little hospital, it's not going to be so hard. What a joke that was. I tried to talk myself into that, but let's see, I'm missing a.
I think it good, yeah.
Yeah,
And I see you.
I think I was everything here for a while. Well, how I started was, you're always nice when you're the new person on the job. And I had two little kids, 3 and 5. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And anyway, the first night I worked, they said, okay, it's you and an orderly. I said, all and for staff, there's 30 beds here. There's OB, I haven't done all these things still. Anyway, it was eye-opening. And, if the ambulance got called off, the orderly left to get the patient. And I said, well, what if an OB patient comes in? It's like, where is my glass of wine? We didn't have any of these pumps and things that counted IV drops and how much patients were getting. You had to count them for a full minute. So you can imagine 30 patients, and then there was how big was the ICU, Judy? 5 beds? Five, and that was staffed with a nurse. So, I went from there, and, I just couldn't do it anymore without sleep, so I went to work for a new doctor that came to town, and I did that for almost 5 years.
Who was that doctor?
Dr. Bill Hurst.
Dr. Hurst.
Yeah.
Some of you he was probably your physician. And the other thing that I got involved with was, does everybody remember Sandy Shepshine?
Yeah.
And National Healthcare Center?
She's still.
Oh, Sandy.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't find a babysitter for my kids. And, I was determined to get some sleep someday. So Sandy was talking about, I finally found her to watch my 2 girls, but she really needed a place, not her home, but a place. So I went to Felix Buckenroth. Now I had just moved there. I was a nurse, and I said, I need a down payment for a building for Sandy Shepshine. And I said, not a big building, something that would house maybe 30 kids. And he said, well, what's your collateral? I said, I don't have any. I don't have any money. And so I gave her a story about all the kids that didn't have places to be kept and have trained people to raise them in there during the day while they were working. And he said, okay. He gave me, I don't remember, 30,000 or something. And I said, I promise I'll pay it back. It might be, $5 a week, but I'll pay it back if somehow Sandy doesn't make it with the kids. Well, just think what it is now. And it's the same person running it, I think. And she did all of us mothers, at least we could get some sleep at home. And then I married Buzz Ely, You know, you ladies remember Buzz Ely?
Yeah.
He was the most wonderful man, you guys. He was a good dad, he was a good stepfather, he was a good physician. And, he had some health problems and couldn't practice anymore, so he just opened up his own real estate company. And he said, you know, those people are just like mothers, they want something and I can give them something. And so he had his own company and was real busy. But he died 2 years ago and left a lot of us missing him every day. And I'm so glad to be back. We moved to Anacortes, Washington, and we were the only people in the class that is given by the Coast Guard that didn't have a boat. And he said, "Why are you here?" And I might have a friend with a boat. I don't know anything about boats. Anyway, I continue to live there. My two girls are close, and Buzz's kids come at least twice a year. So we're still sort of a family. And I love this town. I have to tell just a short story. You know, I came from Salt Lake, big city. And I shopped for all these groceries. I had a huge basket, you know, full of groceries. And I got to the checkout stand. You remember it was across from Felix's Bank, that grocery store? I think it's probably now a gallery or something. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I forgot my checkbook. I'll come right back with it." And he said, "Oh, just come back tomorrow. It's okay." He had never seen me before. And I thought, this is going to be a great place to live. And it was.
Yeah. Yeah, Devine for a second. That's nice. There we go. They're working. It's like I'm a family doctor. I first moved here in 1947. My mom and dad and a friend bought a little dude ranch in Kelly. Dad was an avid outdoorsman, skier, hunter, fisherman. And he was the wrangler and the fishing guide, hunting guide. Mom was the chief cook and bottle washer. And we lived there for 3 years until the Korean War broke out, and then he went back in the Navy. And I was a patient of Dr. McLeod's in the old hospital in town. They thought I had Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and they drew blood samples and determined I had 9-mile running fever, which was another vertebral disease. Now that's over my head today, and he did that back in 1948. So anyway, I did my medical training, and between medical school in the Baylor, I trained in Houston. I was going to go into the Navy because we had student permits, and so we were traveling out to California, which is where both my wife Sue and I were from. And I said, "You want to go see Jackson, Wyoming? It's really a neat place." And she said, "Sure." So we came here and looked around. At the time, I was going to go into obstetrics. I talked to Jack Crenshaw, and he said he was going to be retiring about the time that I finished the Navy and residency. And so I said, "Well, I'll be happy to come take over your practice." While in the Navy, I got interested in pediatrics and in adult medicine and everything else. And also, I did flight physicals, and it's awkward for the pilot to go to an obstetrician's office for a flight visit. So I decided to do family medicine, but most of my practice was obstetrics. Moved back here in 75 and been here ever since. And next week I'm retiring after 50 years. I fill out a Rich later, please. On Independence.
I'm Larry Van Genderen. I want to acknowledge the fact that we have two gentlemen here tonight who have served this community each for 50 years, which is incredible. Usually physicians last 20, maybe 30 sometimes. But for both Rich and Jim Little to have practiced here that long and given that much to this community, especially when it was really difficult, is a high honor. My wife Barbara and I had the pleasure of coming here in 1973 after my brothers and I had been here 20 years before that in 1953. And we had come because of the motion picture Shane. We ran up to Colorado So these two towns were pretty nice. We gotta go see them also. And mountains never left us, and so we both came back. And he lived here part-time and I more full-time. And, we both have had the privilege of being able to stay here with that and had a chance to meet so many of you. And that's just made it, because as a local Catholic priest said a long time ago, people come here for the scenery, but they stay for the people. And that really is true. I want to acknowledge some special parts of the practice that I've got to do here that really doesn't have anything to do with people. Except that I was part of the intercede warfare that occurred for 20 years in the orthopedic community. And was really able to visit it from the sidelines, but that's a whole nother evening. I also had the pleasure of having the first corporate medical practice here when I worked for Jessie Lundy. It was a magnificent woman and the lifetime associate of Dr. Don McLeod, who along with Charlie Huff were the two of the most important early practitioners that we had in the community. And his legacy is just incredible. And one morning I wanted to see patients. We were just moving here and we were hungry and I was poor. I wanted to see more people, generate some revenue. And I went to go to the office and Jessie said, "You can't come in now." She says, "I don't got time for patients down the way. I've got to do billing to get the charts out. You come back at 1 o'clock and I'll have an office full for you." And I did, and she did. And because if she didn't like you, you couldn't get an appointment. She was remarkable woman. And we acknowledge her legacy tonight with the presence here of her son, Robert, and her granddaughter, Laura Lee. Thank you, Bill Lundy.
Well, hi, Director Jayne Ottman. Woo. Is this, okay.
I came in 19. Wow, here's getting thing off fast. Where are we going? Turn it this way.
Okay, Jayne Ottman, I came in 1973. And actually I knew Jim Little's family because our family ski raced, I didn't. And we knew the Littles from Helena, we were from Missoula. I graduated in 1973 and circled 56 ski tops. My dad had founded one of the ski areas in Missoula, and that's all I really knew how to do. And ended up here because I was offered a job to be the ICU nurse, head nurse, I guess, at night. Betty Ann was my boss. She was full of grace, benevolence, and patience. And it was wonderful. I worked with Connie Bartek, I worked with Jessica Lundy, and I worked with Irene Brown. Two things about both. Jessie Lundy, if she didn't like you and you were getting a shot, you would never, ever forget it. Irene Brown was about as gnarly at times. And God love Connie Bartek, because I pitched my nursing hat and said, "I don't need this stuff." She loaned me one in white nylons for ICU. Yeah. Oh, God. Charlie Craighead's in the audience with his wife, Lisa, a fantastic nurse I've worked with, along with many of the other nurses here. And I'm just going to put this caveat in. Hospitals don't work without nurses. You wouldn't have a hospital, you wouldn't have patient care. So kudos to all the nurses. Yeah. But housing was as tough as it is today. Charlie and his cousin Derek found me a homestead cabin on Antelope Flats Road, which was the Harrison Crandall, the artist. And I got the old cabin that was moved out of Jenny Lake. It had wood heat, it had an outhouse, and it didn't have any running water. And my parents were absolutely horrified. But they just sent me to a nice school in Oregon, and they did buy me an electric blanket, and it was 56 below that winter. And Charlie's mother always watched out for me. I loved that woman. And I skied over with my dog, and she made sure I had a bed that night. Living up there, the roads weren't plowed. So I would call the hospital and tell them I was coming. I had a dog called Buckwheat, a yellow lab, but I'd bring her with me. I'd chuck her in one of the PT rooms, turn the intercom on, play fetch in the middle of the night on the linoleum floors, and do ICU work. It was just everybody do what you can with what you've got. It was baptism by fire, totally baptism by fire. Husband fella, oh, there's so many stupid, funny stories, but, you really had to use your noggin. You had the problem solved. You didn't have things at the ready. As Betty Ann said, you counted IV drips because there were no pumps. Yep, and, we learned since we didn't have any food available on the night shift, that we pimped one of the workers in the dietary, which there was just the cook and Rhonda or whoever it was. So she hid the key so we could stick our hand in at night, get the key, open the bars, and make ourselves ham sandwiches. And then the cook would come in the next day and go, "What the heck? There's no meat for you. Where'd the ham go? Where'd the hot roast go?" Well, we could tell you, but anyway, that was it. One of the best stories, and then I'll end it, is Cookie Hughes was a great nurse right in there with the Connie Bartex, and she owned a little deli, which is, it's the kitchen now, but she also did that. But we had to do deliveries, as Judy Basye and I recall once. I wouldn't let her leave because I said, "This woman's in there right now, Judy. I've never had a kid. You're not going home." But anyway, I had to deliver a baby one night. It's like, oh my God, there wasn't anybody around. But when we were done, yes, I think Bill England came in, the orthopedist. He cut the umbilical cord, I think, 6 feet long. It was he just wound it around and then and his rubber galoshes. And I had to do the laundry, which was a Maytag Ringer washing machine. So we rinsed out the bloody sheets. Whoever was on the floor that night for the nurse kind of kept an eye on the unit. Nobody died. I was cranking out the dirty, getting them rinsed out, and that's what we did. That was life back in 1972. I did transition into public health and became the nursing director. Jim became my boss, and I worked again with a lot of hospital people. Judy was also my boss at St. John's, and then she came to work for me in public health, and I was her boss.
I'm JoAnne Scott, and I'm retiring with my boss, Rich Sugden, in a week from today.
Yeah.
After, gosh, Rich.
It's been a while.
19, yeah, it was early 80s when I started working as Rich's nurse. But when I moved here in 1976 to ski for the winter, because I had visited a previous winter, and there was nowhere like Jackson Hole, right, Jim?
Oh, yeah, it's true.
And we came for the winter, and then summer happened. And oh my gosh, where are you gonna be other than right here? So that was 1976, and here we are, 49 years later. Yeah. But the ski season of that year happened to be the no snow, very cold winter. And we rode up the tram to Tower 3. I had a B pass, for those of you who remember the A and B passes. I had a B pass. We rode the tram to Tower 3 and hiked down that steep tower to the snow, carrying our skis, managing our poles somehow, and just to ski a few short runs because there was dirt at the end of the run. It was fun, but unusual. And the summer happened, and as I said, I just didn't want to be anywhere else. When I arrived in 1976, I had an active California nurse's license as well as a British Columbia nurse's license. And Wyoming wouldn't recognize either of my licenses. So they said, the only option you have is to sit for your boards again, after I'd already been practicing nursing for, well, wasn't that many years, but
Wow.
that was a daunting thing. So there was an opening at the hospital. So there was an opening at the hospital for a ward clerk. Oh, man, that was the job for me. I just took it in a heartbeat. And that way I got to know and meet almost everyone on this panel. I don't think Barry was practicing at the time, but I got to meet everyone and I got to just get to feel what a small town hospital was like. There was one ward for everybody, except for the ER and the ICU. There was, everyone was in that, what, by that time it was 50 beds? 45, 40? There were beds that were never filled, says Jim. So anyway, that was a blast. And because I'd come from big city hospitals where you never really got to know, you got to know the nurses and the staff and the orderlies and everybody, but the docs were kind of in and out quickly. But at the nurses station, which was very much the gathering place, there were, docs would come in to do their rounds, and I just kind of sit back and kind of wait for their orders to come in so I could process them. And eventually they just get casual with each other, and I could name names, but then they get really casual and they just light up a cigarette and start chatting with each other and visiting with all of us. And it all got very, very comfortable. For those of you who remember Dr. Cameron, she was a sweetie and a character. And I think, I don't want to mention other names because I'm not sure if that doc was a smoker, but he had kind of enjoyed hanging around the nurses station, and he left after a few years, Dr. JoAnne Scott. So then I sat for my boards and I began, I remember I had my first baby in 1978, and early in 1979, Lila Matejowski, who was the head of nursing at the time, called me and said, JoAnne, are you ready to come back to work? And my baby was 6 months old, and I said, are you kidding? I have a baby and he needs me. So then she called back a little later. She said, no, we're ready to start an official obstetrics department. Do you want to come and work? And I was like, oh, okay. And I did. And that was the funnest job ever. Got to work with Jim and Rich and Betty Ann and Judy. And Judy was in ICU with Betty Ann at the early part of that. But Betty Ann was being one of her everything roles. I did get to work with her occasionally. It was great. So then I met Dr. Rich Sugden, and he was delivering babies by the dozen at the time because there was Brent Blue, Dr. Crenshaw was closed or had closed his practice by then. So it was Blue and Rich and Ricka was delivering. Doc Rue came eventually. And that was just a great job. And then I started to work with Rich in his office because I had a child, and the OB department was becoming demanding, and I was being called in at night, but I had a child and I needed to be with my child, so it was like, okay, this is an opportunity I don't think I'll turn down. And now we are in 2025, and I'm still really enjoying every working day I have, and every other day in between with Rich and his lovely wife Sue. So that's my story.
Okay, thank you all for sharing those beginnings and fun connections. Hopefully we don't get rained on, but it's a nice cool breeze. Let's start. We're gonna go to our next question. If you want to share just one, short if possible, favorite cases. One of your most memorable or rewarding cases or experiences while you were practicing.
Well, I think one of my most rewarding cases were taking care of patients, and I mean, I can just name all sorts of patients, from med-surg to oncology, and really Mike Mennel. When we started oncology, Mike was there right across the street. We didn't have a oncologist that was in the house, and Mike came over all the time whenever we called. I know sometimes it was really hard, but gosh, he saved our lives so much, and it was, you know, he made it possible so we could do that. But one of the most memorable times I had was when I first came. I'd only been here about a month. I was working nights, and it was the night of the Bad Mountain Shootout, and I was 22 years old. And all I remember is a sheriff pointing a rifle at me and said, "Get the heck out of the hall." And he didn't say that. And so I was working with 2As, and we hid all that whole night. And, you know, I can't remember all the things that happened, but it started with a horse trailer being stolen up at Granite, and somebody had a heart attack, and a shootout. It was coming down to the hospital. So it was a terrible night. And one of the sheriffs got killed that night. It was terrible. And I went home and I called my dad, and he said, "You are coming home." Well, I didn't go home, but it was like I mean, I just never forgotten that. And really, and the George Lanes is here tonight too. When I first came, George was here working for 2 years as an orderly. And I mean, it was fun working with George too, all those years. And there's all sorts of, I think I loved my oncology patients too. And I could just tell many, many stories, but that's all I'll tell for now. Because we need to keep it short, right?
I can't remember how many years I've been here, but, we had a position on the staff that was a smoker. And everybody smoked back then practically.
Yeah.
If you went out to the main waiting room, there were two of those big metal ashtrays that just were full at the end of the day. But this man was a terrible, sloppy smoker. And you could remind him that every patient in ICU was on oxygen. He got a clean, whatever. We still had this cigarette that had a 2-inch ash. One day I had come in and I stopped at X-ray, and the X-ray tech had spent the early morning baking these beautiful cookies, chocolate chip cookies, and arranging them on this paper plate just beautifully. And she said, "JoAnne, stop, I'll give you a cookie." So I was eating my cookie, and this physician came by, and of course he had his 2-inch ash on the end of the finger. And we used to just watch it. The pin was gonna fall, and where was it gonna fall? And so he said, "Oh, cookies, can I have one?" And he bent over and got one. Well, you know what happened to his ash? All over the cookies. And I just felt so sorry for this X-ray tech. She wanted to cry. You know, we didn't want to eat those cookies after that. And so he went to the OR, that's where he was headed. And he had this really nice plaid, I can still see it. It was orange and yellow and green plaid jacket, sports coat. And so I waited till his first case started and I went in there, I got a garbage bag, I emptied every ashtray I could find. And I went in there and I found his locker and I filled every little crevice, pocket, everything. And then the rest went in his shoes. And then I just left the OR. And never said anything to anybody. Yeah, and he came out hours later, and never said a word to me. I knew that he knew what was going to be, because I was always on his butt about his cigarette. But we had fun back there, we had fun in that hospital. Our hospital, I live in Anacortes now, and our hospital is very much the same. When I moved there, they hired me to be the director of nursing. And it wasn't the same as Jackson, but it had the same small town feel that everybody knew one another. And, I miss that today. You used to be able to get a patient in with a phone call to the specialist or somebody. And now we have to go through 3 different teenagers. Let's call them teenagers. I went to school all those years to ask this teenager if I could do the surgery. What is the matter with medicine? And that was quite a few years ago, but, Rich wanted me to tell that story. He belonged to that story. And, he never ever said anything to me. That's kind of the part of the April Fools. You don't say you've been had, but you've been had.
What, the other is. So Jim Lou was out of town. The only pediatrician. And. He's out of town and Dr. Ely, Betty Ann's husband, was taking care of a patient that was close to me. And during the second stage of labor, her placenta separated from her uterus and rushed her in. And she had asked me to be the pediatrician because I was covering for Jim. He's out of town. Rushed into the operator and got the baby out, and they handed me the only time in 50 years of practice an F-guards. F-guards girl baby technique that had no signs of life, that had no heartbeat, that had like the microphone.
Let's try this.
And so we got the baby resuscitated, and that baby is now an engineer, and it's JoAnne's son. That was one of the most rewarding things in my practice.
Wasn't because Jim was out of town. I had chosen you. As
Never mind, Jim.
I sold it more.
Okay, and the most interesting is my frontier medicine case that I've told a couple times. So I'm in the emergency room. When I came here, there were 4 doctors covering the emergency room, another family physician, a radiologist, a pediatrician. We're covering the ER, Jim, and then Dr. Everton, or Dr. Fogarty, who was the pathologist who was covering the emergency room. And they said, do you want to cover the 5th day? And I said, oh, sure, I will. It was Friday. Well, they didn't tell me that Friday was rodeo day. I took care of a lot of broken cowboys. So I'm in the ER one night, and this cowboy comes in carrying this teenage girl and says, you got to help my girlfriend here. She took my coyote poison. I kind of woke up and I said, well, what kind of coyote poison? He said, I don't know. Some trapper gave it to me. It kills them really fast. I think it's cyanide. Oh, God. Well, treatment of cyanide poison is very complicated, and the treatment is sometimes dangerous. So I looked through the toxicology textbook. Trying to really find the treatment for cyanide poison, and we started. I told him, go out and find out what the stuff is. They said, was just in a glass jar with a big one.
Here, should you, and I'm gonna.
So it was just a plastic jar with no labels. And so I said, well, go find out quick because we gotta treat this right. So he goes out and I'm just getting ready to inject this medicine that would help cure her. She had cyanide poisoning or might kill her. She didn't. And he sticks his head into the door and he says, Doc, don't worry. I talked to him. He said it was just strychnine. Well, that's the toxicology book and went through it. Well, it turns out the treatment of strychnine is really simple. You. One, two, three, four. Puts the patient to sleep. I keep us thinking, Harvey Wright, who is the nurse anesthetist. Put this down to sleep all night long. The next morning she woke up and walked home. That's what your medicine.
Do you remember? Not bad. You try. I have three stories. One human, two animals. The first is caring for the son of Jack and Mimi Crenshaw. And asking to care for the son or daughter of a fellow physician is the highest honor that any physician can ever have. Because they know who's around and what can be done. And Jack and Mimi had a ranch in Bondurant that they enjoyed and was their pride and joy and what really brought them into this country. And they had a tractor with a power takeoff, and their young high school age son managed to get his Levi's caught in that thing and did severe damage to a leg below the knee. And we had just the one ambulance here, and Harvey Wright and I decided that we'd go down and see what we could do to help. I had never ridden in the ambulance since college when I worked with one. But we went down there my first time to Bondurant. The first time I'd gone through was in the dark. I didn't know what it was like. We went down there and took Michael back to here and began the care for that. And it was a very rewarding and meaningful time. I had fortunately had some special training in the cure of amputations at Northwestern University, where I had undertaken my orthopedics residency. And it worked out that Michael was able to rise from that, live a full and productive life, and became a national national in cross country. And it was a real joy to be able to get through that. And it was a long time when we would, could keep people in the hospital for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah. Sometimes I brought in my cameras and things for him. He was just flat out bored. He could take pictures of things. The second time was also very early, either in 73 or 74. And John Turner, who's with us now, came in with a large gunny sack covering an object. And he said, I've got a bald eagle in here. I'd never been close to a bald eagle in my life. And this one had a broken wing. This was before the days of the Raptor Center. And not knowing what to do, I figured I'd just go back to basics. And we were able to see the hollow bone that was broken. And so I went to the operating room and got a K-wire, which is a steel pin. And we would slip it in and push it down and pull it back out. And of course, it made that wing a little heavier than the other. But the bird recovered from that simple maneuver, just full of circuit. Only pilots do that. Eagles are better. So they only have one motor in the front. Anyway, it was a very satisfying. The equally wonderful time I had was as an avocation, getting to learn bovine obstetrics on the job at the meat ranch with Roy Martin, who was a wonderful old cowboy who worked first for Peter Hansen and then later for Cliff, his son, And then later for Mary Mead, the granddaughter of Peter. And that was an absolute joy. We would deliver a number of cabs. And I learned a great deal about a subject which I knew very little about, because all I taken care of were people.
Alicia Cox, who was the alchemist here, took care of the eagle and asked me, came in for a regular exam and said, what do you know about eagles? I said, nothing. And she said, well, some fishermen found this golden eagle tumbling down the creek, and they brought him to him, and he just lies there on his side and gurgles. And anyway, we took care of that eagle. We got him almost completely well, and then I'm not sure if the disease, which was a fungal pneumonia, or the medicine killed him. But so I also had an eagle. An ill eagle, because it was illegal for us to take care of him.
Yeah. It wasn't for us, we didn't know. That's right. We had a game of fish future.
Pushing, but, was on, push harder. That's, Betty Ann, no. Betty Ann, was green.
Okay, Betty Ann was my boss. Judy, I think you were 3 to 11. I was still nights. And, and Betty Ann, correct me again, it was a patient that had a bad car accident or a motorcycle wreck, and part of her buttocks was gone, correct? Steered her rear end. Okay. Well, patient Dr. Hurst, and she was really having a difficult time healing. And I came on one day, pulled back the covers to do a dressing change, and there were maggots in the bed on purpose. And to clean the wound, oh God, I
Ready to throw.
It did their job. They cleaned the wound. They stayed on the wound. They were not all over the bed. That woman healed, and
Yeah, so not a big voice, I just tell.
she was able to leave. That was, I mean, great. But I'll just never forget maggots. And look, they do it too. But that was the first. Another time, it was a patient of, and I'll just say Dr. Elmore. He's passed. And I'll say the name of the patient because many of you will know Tiny Wiley, who's long gone. He owned the property where Cuddy's is. And he was an obese man, and I don't know, maybe he had his appendix out or something, I don't know, but he was on a hugely restricted diet, like 600 calories or something, did not.
There was no way this man was gonna heal. Today. And so, again, we have the key to the. Get out there. And by God, he was out in a couple of weeks.
I'm going to be brief, but I failed to remember or recall that I had a 25-year practice of biofeedback, neurofeedback, and Mike Mano took really good care of our practice during those years. And it was really one of the most satisfying, rewarding positions I have ever had. And I know there are family members, some of the people I worked with, and it was such a pleasure. That's it.
We're challenged with the sound, but I mean, the thing is, as we knew, the stories were gonna take a while. But if we have such an amazing crowd here, maybe we could take 1 or 2 questions if anybody has any.
From Jim Little. We didn't hear from Jim Little.
Jim Little, possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stand up and shout it out.
Maybe we'll sort of- Thank you. This is that back then.
I'll try and stand up for this. Things were different back in the days when I started. And I found that some of the challenges were the patients that we took care of. Some of the challenges were the physicians that I was associated with. And some of them were my own problems that I had to deal with. But I thought that the hospital has grown, it's changed, it's enlarged, but I think it's still a fabulous place to work, and I've never regretted a day that I've been here.
Place to be a patient too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we've all been patients here.
yeah, yeah. So, I think that, I'm afraid if I really start talking about some of the patients and some of the physicians that were here, I'd be liable. And I'm a little bit afraid of that. So I don't have stories that I want to tell out in public right on. What? Over a few shots for sure. Yeah. I think that for me, it's been a really fabulous experience, and I really have been proud of the people that I've been able to work with, and especially the nursing staff and the nurses. I think that that's one of the things that's really been outstanding for me is we've had such a great staff of nurses that I'm really.
Thank you. Couple of questions? Yeah.
Well, you guys kind of skipped over the earlier days. Dr. Huff's granddaughter is sitting here. Everybody, you have a multiple write-ups about Helen Lang's life, about Dr. Huff, something he wrote, something other people have written. Got a lot of photographs, and we'll be back there on the table. I don't want to blow off.
Thank you. There's a tank inside too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say hello.
And so I would like to say, nurses are very, also the lab techs that get up at 3 in the morning and just see their kids who drive in. And the cleaning ladies, without the cleaning ladies, we'd all be dying of MRSA. So doctors are very important, and you know a whole bunch of stuff. You've got a lot of people working with you who also know a whole bunch of different stuff.
Sure.
And so anyway, yes, I think we need appreciation for everyone. I have been a patient over there a couple of times, and I am very impressed. Thank you. Yeah.
This is more of a call out. Please stand.
Stand, yeah.
Please stand, just so we can hear you. This is more of a call out, a little bit of a thank you to Dr. Sugden and everybody else. I'm Patrick Cadwell, came here in 2003 as district ranger for Grand Teton National Park. At that time, the National Park Service implemented a new physical program that all the rangers had to go through. And to be honest with you, it was a pain in the ass. It's gone from Dr. Sugden's office to St. John's Physicians Clinic and gone to other contractors. Continues to be a pain in the ass. The medical standards are actually more strict than the NASA astronauts have to go through to be a US Park Ranger. That's serious. That's serious. When I came here, I hadn't met Dr. Sugden in his practice at all. But at that time, Dr. Sugden had taken it on to do that National Park Service. And thanks to him, for several years there, until he said, I'm done with this. He kept park rangers in the field. So thank you, Dr. Sugden, for that. We appreciate that for time and effort. It was not an easy thing to do. I have also been a frequent flyer in the hospital since I did here. So thank you to all of you that have worked there and kept us going through all this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think all of us.
I'll get
Thank you. They are the foundation of excellence that this valley lives on, and all of us are at an age that we're gonna need and thrive on them. So thank you. And if we can give them a great round.
So I guess you guys are not worried about HIPAA.
Moderately.
Yes, I brought them to. Yeah. I'm just past that, just beyond the hill where you're trying to outfit. And people like this positive. All glass.
Medical stuff. Garbage stuff.
Yeah, for those who couldn't hear, that was Claudia Gillette describing the street glass pieces. Okay, because of our sound issues, I just encourage everyone to mingle a little bit more, and then, so it doesn't work, to mingle a little bit more, come up and ask these guys questions, directly, and have a good evening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you, everyone, our panelists.